the district. That will that be later?
All right.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody.
I think they're going to meet.
Thank you for mute some folks real quick. Thank you for joining us for Sustaining Soil Health Conservation Funding's Impact on the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, or you might hear us call it the NLRS for short, because it is a mouthful. My name is Liz Ruppel. I'm the lead organizer with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and we are just one of the many organizations bringing you a week full of amazing opportunities to dig deep and learn a little bit more about soil health. So today we are going to kind of walk through some of the background of what the nutrient loss reduction strategy is and why conservation funding is so critical to help us reach our goals. We're going to hear from a few of our valued guests, and they are going to also walk through what a few of the important pieces are into making sure conservation reaches farmers. So you'll hear from Michael Woods, the executive director of the Association of Soil Water Conservation Districts, Elliott Clay with the Environmental Council, Corey Lacey with the Soybean Association, and Dylan Cook from American Farmland Trust. We'll walk through some solutions together, and then we can take questions throughout if you'd like to throw them in the chat. And we'll also save a little time at the end for questions if we do have time in our jam-packed hour. So before we get started, I would love to give our panel, if you will. It's not quite a panel, but our guests a chance to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about their role and how their organization is involved in nutrient loss reduction strategy work. So first, I'll pass it over to Dylan Cook with American Farmland Trust.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Liz. Dylan Cook with American Farmland Trust, the Midwest Policy Manager, and we've been involved with the nutrient loss reduction strategy for a number of years, sitting on the policy working group, and also working with partners around the states on solutions and programs that can help us achieve both the 2025 and 2035 targets. Happy to be with you all today.
Thanks, Dylan. Let's next go to Elliott Clay.
Yeah, hey all, and thanks for Stewardship Alliance for helping organize this. My name is Elliott Clay. I'm the Land Use Programs Director for Illinois Environmental Council. I'm really excited to be pulling this together for Lobby Day on Wednesday and just talking generally with everybody about the need to improve soil health. From the environmental perspective, we're obviously very concerned about the prevalence of like nutrient pollution in our waters and those kind of things, and trying to figure out what we can be doing to help incentivize more state investment in conservation and all those kind of fun things. But excited to talk more with you all here a little bit about all the different fun things we're working on.
Thanks, Elliott. And Corey.
Yeah, Corey Lacey, Illinois Soybean Association, Public Policy Manager covering environmental, regulatory, and conservation. Excited to be here and talk today about these important bills and this important work that we're doing.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And just a little bit about the Stewardship Alliance too and how we are involved in the NLRS. We are a farmer-led, eater-powered alliance of folks who use our choices and voices to shape a just and regenerative food system. So as much as we can, whenever we can, we want to use our choices to support local and sustainable food and agriculture. But we know we can't buy our way out of the food system here. So we need to use our voices to make change at the roots. And our organization in the past focused a lot more on technical training for farmers, but now we have really shifted into more of a policy focus, and we work directly with our caucuses at the Stewardship Alliance that are both farmer-led. We have a soil health caucus and a local food farmer caucus, and actually just started a livestock farmer caucus who helps us steer us in the right direction. So they're behind a lot of the work that we do and the policies that we get to work with these amazing partners on. So many of you may have joined the call and thought, what the heck is the nutrient loss reduction strategy? Feel free to show me if you if you've never heard of the nutrient loss reduction strategy, if you want to be brave and raise your hand or give me a thumbs up, just so I know those that maybe have a little bit of background and those that maybe don't. Okay, so we have some nutrient loss reduction strategy pros, which is awesome. I still want to provide just a little bit of a background as to what it is that we're talking about, because we can't chat solutions without knowing the heart of the issue. So the problem is that nutrients are running off and it's creating, hold on, let me find who I need to mute. There we go. Okay, so nutrients are running off and it's causing a lack of clean drinking water, and it is causing algal blooms throughout Illinois and especially for our friends in the Gulf of Mexico. Today, it's going to feel like we might be peeling an onion as we get to everything, but it's all really important as we get towards that solution point of our conversation. So this image, it may be familiar to many of you, but you're looking at how interconnected Illinois is with the states surrounding the Mississippi River. So that light teal color is the Mississippi River, and that is it's trailing directly into the Gulf of Mexico. Our waterways, our streams, our rivers, lakes, everything is connected to the Mississippi River. And that flow is taking sediment, our soil, chemicals down. It might be applied to our driveways, our farm fields, our backyards, and it's emptying that directly into the Gulf. So as we talk about soil health, before I get to what that actually causes, I wanted to pull, we talk about soil health a lot, we throw around the term, but for those that maybe have never seen a demonstration, I wanted to show you what a rainfall simulator looks like. Because as we talk about conservation, we're talking about shielding our soils, and you can have bare soil versus soil that has like root structure or plants in the ground. And this gives you a really nice visualization of why our organizations are all promoting that we use conservation practices like cover crops, etc. So here is just a quick 1 minute or so video showing you what a rainfall simulator is.
Today is use a rainfall simulator to talk about water movement into soil. So in these 4 pans, we have the same soil type, just in different managements. In the pans, we have mower plow, CRP, recently converted CRP to cropland, and 15 years of no-till. So what we'll see is how water moves across the surface in these front bins and how water moves through the soil in the bins behind it. As you can see, this is simulating a pounding rain on some of these different soil management systems. So you can see on the mower plow pan, that soil is running off the surface and it's actually quite muddy in that first jug. Underneath, there's very little water that's moving through that soil deeper into the soil profile. On the CRP, you can see that the water running off of the surface is quite clear, and a lot of that water is infiltrating through that soil, which would recharge deeper in the soil profile. In the recently converted CRP, some of that disturbance is leading to a little bit of runoff, but then also water moving through that soil and still infiltrating. On the last pan, we have wheat on a 15-year no-till soil. And you can see that the water that is running off is very clear, but most of the water is actually moving through that soil and infiltrating deeper into the soil profile. After 1 inch of water in this demonstration, you can see how the water either moves across the surface or down through the soil profile. You can catch this demonstration on the NDSU Soil Health Bus Tour taking place.
Okay, super quick video, but it gives you that nice visualization of like what can actually happen to our soil and what we're putting on our soil if we don't have anything shielding it in place. So there's been calculations made that we're losing at least 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year. And that might be due to the heavy rain events that she's explaining here, or wind erosion. And much of that water isn't going to infiltrate in the middle. It's not replenishing our underground aquifers if it's just running off and into other neighbors' fields or into the Gulf of Mexico. We can see that cover crops or no-till practices are really important, and farmers that we work with, that many of the other organizations that you heard of from today, are working directly with folks that use these practices and try to make their soil spongy, if you will, so that they can let water infiltrate and Yes, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm trying to let people in the room do a couple things at once. So I'm
What
gonna
we'll do today is use a
go to
rainfall
the
simulator.
next slide here. So when we have bare soil and when it does run off of farm fields, it is creating a problem, like I said, for farmers, eaters, fishermen, and other wildlife. And this is one of the most recent photos of what this dead zone looks like. It is an area of really low oxygen that can kill off fish and marine wildlife. And it's usually nitrogen and phosphorus that farmers could be applying on their fields, or chemicals homeowners are spraying on their lawns, sewage treatment plants, etc., that are leaving our state. And this whole this whole dead zone here is one of the main reasons that our state and many states surrounding the Mississippi River have created what's called a nutrient loss reduction strategy. So before the strategy was created, a hypoxia task force was created, and this group was led by the US EPA, and it brought states surrounding the Mississippi together to develop these strategies to try to tackle the issue. And Illinois has been tasked with reducing our nitrogen and phosphorus loads into the Mississippi thanks to the development of this. And back in 2015 is when we saw the first strategy laid out. And our targets are kind of a long-term objective. We want to see a 45% reduction in phosphorus and nitrogen loads originating from Illinois. And we have these little interim targets of a 15% decrease in nitrogen and a 25% decrease in total phosphorus by 2025. So we've seen a few updates since 2015. We have a biennial report that comes out every 2 years. So back in December, we saw, I believe, the 4th installment of this report be published. What we saw from that report is that nutrient levels in Illinois waterways really continued to increase in 2021 and 2022 compared to some other baseline measurements. And the NLRS partnership anticipates that the strategy is likely going to fall short of our 2025 goals, particularly in phosphorus. And this is despite multi-sector investments in the nutrient loss reduction strategy and in conservation and giving farmers resources for tools, et cetera, and the practices that farmers could be using to support reduction efforts across the state. So from this chart, you can see that the current loads far exceed our 2025 goal. And that's why they're really thinking that there's just no way that we can reach the goals. And some calculations that the Illinois Environmental Council and Stewardship Alliance and other organizations like Prairie Rivers Network did a couple years ago, actually, it was showing that we could be as far as 200 years from based on the path that we're going. So just those highlights, like I said, nutrient loss is on the rise, climate change. So the wind, the more intense rainfall events that we're having are a driver to this. Agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to this. And we see that there is some sustained, if you do dig into the report, there is some success on wastewater treatment plants, which is really great, but we have a lot more work to do. And just want to, I think this might be one of my last slides before I pass it over to Michael, that I want to make it known that soil health is something that impacts all of us. And when our soils are bare, we are reducing the resilience of agriculture sector. And this is creating some added management costs and loss of soil health. When we see water, especially taking away nutrients that farmers are paying a lot of money for, and the soil down into the Gulf, that's them losing a lot of money that they have applied there. There's an increase in utility costs for water treatment to protect clean water. So AKA you and I might be paying more to treat our water. Climate change can become worse. And we already saw that Illinois' planting zone has become, it has changed due to climate change, and we're seeing increased rainfall events and storms. So if we try to act now, we can try to prevent these issues. And unhealthy soil. If you guys could put yourself on mute. I can't find the person that is not muted. There it is. Okay, sorry about that. Soil health also disproportionately impacts low-income, disadvantaged, and discriminated communities. And the health of our Illinois food and water economy, the environment are all rooted in the health of our soils. Everyone is impacted by the health of our soils, but especially marginalized communities. And like I shared earlier, excess nutrients are making a huge impact on marine wildlife, but that are making a huge impact on marine wildlife. And we've just been seeing devastating impacts here in Illinois. Algal blooms, you might be seeing them like in your own ponds and lakes. That's not uncommon, and they usually start up in a couple months when the weather is getting warmer. So I now want to pass it over to the Executive Director, Michael Woods of the Association of Illinois Soil Water Conservation Districts. He's going to give us more of a background into the boots of the ground work that the association and the 97 conservation districts do here in Illinois, and share a little bit about some of the funding constraints that they have seen. So Michael, I'll pass it to you, and you just let me know when you need me to flip over to the next slide.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay, Liz?
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And thank you so much, everyone, for taking time to join us today to get a little bit deeper insight into some of the pressing issues facing soil and health here in Illinois. Wanted to give you a little bit of a background in the context of, what's happened over the past 80 plus years. My first slide here, as you can see, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt on March 1st, 1937, or actually 1936, he created a law which basically created the Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act. And that law specifically noted that it's important for us to protect our soil. Now, remember, in the context of time, he was coming out of the Dust Bowl era, going into and being impacted by this significant depression that was impacting our nation. And the agricultural sector had been decimated at many levels, and not only on the environmental front, but also the economic front. And so he was advocating for the creation of a soil and water or soil conservation district throughout the nation. 1 year later, on February 26th, 1937, I think if you can go to the next slide there, Liz. Basically, FDR wrote to every single governor across the United States and said that, the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. And he asked for every governor to create, in essence, soil conservation districts. Here in Illinois, we call those soil and water conservation districts, and we serve all 102 counties with the 97 districts. And the hope is that we will be able to be the frontline service to provide and engage with producers and our communities to celebrate opportunities and showcase a path forward for protecting the most important resource into the agricultural sector. We know in the state of Illinois that we have 32 million total acres. Of that 32 million acres, 27 million of those acres are dedicated to agricultural production. Of that 27 million, 23 million, and those are rough numbers, are dedicated to our row crop production, our corn and soybean folks. And so when you start looking at that, at present, we have only about 1.4 million acres of cover crops roughly across the entire state of Illinois. And so when Liz noted earlier about cover crops,
could hear.
Oops, you hear me okay? Sorry about, was that my cutting out there, Liz, or?
No, you're good. I'm just sorry.
Okay,
I'm trying to mute people.
No, you're good. I appreciate it. So, of that, we continue to need to protect that front line, putting those conservation practices on the ground. We know that many producers are being driven by economic variables, operational variables, and sheer just trying to get crop off the land. when we start looking at it, bottom line is whether you want to call it climate resiliency or climate change, the bottom line is we have to be more weather resilient. Climate change leads to weather patterns, and we need to help producers identify methods that they can protect the most important natural resource, and that's their soil and their water that impacts and supports their operations. If you can move to the next slide there, Liz. Ultimately, when we start looking at this Act of 1937, that call to the governors, he said basically we need to coordinate the assistance from all levels. And here's the important part that he's talking about, is that we need to coordinate, and that government needs to be an active part in this. And we need to have soil and water conservation districts supporting all the efforts needed throughout the state. If you want to go to the next slide, Liz. Perfect. So, of our 97 soil and water conservation districts, if you start looking at the frontline conservation, resource conservationists and administrative coordinators, it's important that they help to implement, conserve and restore, protect, assist, help, and then ultimately reach out to communities and schools to teach and to support efforts in the conservation on the front lines. But what we continue to find is that we have a capacity issue in our front lines. And this is where our need to educate our elected officials, engage folks to say that if we want to protect our natural resources, we need to keep people on the front lines. And when we talk about the front lines, we need to know that, A, we have 97 soil and water conservation districts needing to have resource conservationists on their front lines. But not only having those people there, but they need to have a living wage and paid for the contribution that they do, the education that they bring, the knowledge that they bring to the table. And so we need to find a way to be able to increase the level of pay for these individuals. We need to make sure that they have adequate and appropriate insurance coverage to support their families if we want to keep these folks in our communities as well. When we do not have frontline conservationists working with producers, we cannot get conservation on the ground. And so we need to continue to invest in those folks, both in providing the base salaries, but then also providing an investment to ensure that it's in tune with and in line with what's happening in the marketplace. Unfortunately, for many of our rural communities, some of our conservationists could easily leave and probably make more money working at McDonald's, Casey's, or Walmart, and having limited knowledge in those kind of areas. And so we need to be able to support them and get that pay up to par so that we can keep these people in the position. Constant turnaround for these soil and water conservation districts is not a good thing, because if you're always training new people, trying to get them prepared and build relationships with those producers. Remember, producers don't shift on the dime. It takes time to build up the relationships with them and to educate them about the impact that conservation practices can have. And those conservation district staff aren't just competing against lack of maybe knowledge from the producer. They're competing with big ag industry that are trying to sell the producers, more inputs that are maximizing their profits on their land, or just providing them with the latest resources to be more efficient. And so we're competing against, a lot of variables. It's not just they're out there trying to promote the importance of conservation. They're trying to shift perceptions and ultimately production of practices on the field. If you can go to the next slide for me. And if you want to go ahead and maybe jump through the next couple slides, I apologize. I don't know if you can, if there's like a
Michael, this might be the last slide I have for you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. Sorry about that. So one of the things we want to look at as we're out engaging our legislators is to celebrate with them that their investments actually return back to the community, not only by providing frontline conservation practices, but every one of these individuals that are working with the soil and water conservation districts are paying taxes in their local community. They're buying homes, they're buying gas, they're supporting their local communities, they're having children in our school districts and so forth. And so these are individuals that are right on the front lines, working with our communities and giving back in many levels. And so I think we have to remind our elected officials that everything that they do by investing in conservation basically leverages and provides the best impact back into our community. So I think anything else there you wanted me to hit on, Liz?
No, I think you did a great recap there, Michael. Maybe I can pitch a question to some of the group members too, as far as, I think you started to dig into it as far as like an SWCD perspective, and that reaching out into the conservation world here in Illinois. But I'm curious, Elliot, Dylan, Corey, if you wanted to maybe add on to anything that we said or share why you think conservation funding is really crucial here for Illinois.
Perfect. I think you were directing that towards maybe Elliot and Dylan. Is that correct?
If you wanted to add any more context to that, Michael, or I can, yeah, if anybody else in our list of presenters wants to share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share. I mean, I think a big part of this, and this is not limited only to like the agricultural sector either. We, like as a state, went through years of like fiscal mismanagement, which has had really bad impacts on funding, not just for traditional conservation efforts that we think of, but for a lot of environmental programs and social programs and a lot of other things. And I'll give credit to the current administration and the leaders of the agencies that they've done a really good job in recent years of going after federal dollars and things that we traditionally have not done a good job doing. And, you know, I think we're finally to a place where after like literal, like a couple decades of like some pretty bad financial situations are in a place where we can be getting some dollars here that we haven't traditionally been able to in the past. So I think we're at a moment right now that is really, really important because Illinois needs to show that it can step up and get this kind of stuff and get it going, because we have the opportunity now and we can't drop the ball, because if we do, it's not going to look good for us going forward. But yeah, we're kind of primed for kind of a cool opportunity right now.
And Elliot, I might add on to that. One of the things that I think we have to do is ensure that we connect with our legislative base, because the reality is we know the majority of our legislators in the state of Illinois come from more urban areas, and they tend to think that soil and water conservation district services are only for our rural communities. And so we need to help educate them that soil and water conservation is impacting everybody in the entire state. Someone once told me, and I thought it was a really astute observation, is that what makes Illinois different from many other states across the Midwest is that the majority of our water starts where the base of the population's at. And so therefore it runs through Chicago and down throughout the state and then ends up into the Mississippi and the southern, corridor of Illinois. Whereas if you go to a lot of other Midwest states, the water ends up into where the larger population's at. And so therefore they have a larger interest in the impact of water, and soil directly impacts our water and so forth. And so we have to sort of remind them the importance that soil and water conservation downstate does impact our overall quality of water, even though they're at the head, the beginning of our water sources. The other thing we have to do is help both producers, legislators, and just our general public to recognize the importance of why the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico is important. Many people here in the Midwest, we may not eat shrimp, but the livelihood and the impact on their environment is something we have to bring home and drive it home, the importance of what we contribute to our overall environment of our nation as well. And then the economic impact. We also have to recognize and support educate our legislators and our elected officials and the general public on the importance of protecting soil health. Soil health is a long-term picture, right? It's something that you build up and you address. But we have to showcase that the importance of today and thinking long-term and not just short-term. And sadly, we in America often are very short-sighted in all of our perspectives. Everything we do, right? We go to Black Friday every Christmas because we need to buy stuff to replace what we shouldn't have to buy all the time, but we do, and we think very short-term. And when we start looking at these type of issues, when we talk about the environment, the climate, our soil health, our agricultural industry, and so forth, we've got to help people start to think long-term and start looking at the importance of what's best for the next generation as well.
Well said, Michael. Anything else, Dylan, Corey, you'd want to add to that?
No, I think both were really well said. I would certainly echo Elliot's point of, given the era of Inflation Reduction Act, we really need to do all that we can to show Illinois support for these initiatives and capture as many of those dollars to support locally led initiatives as we can.
I would just follow up with the talking point that I like to bring up, which is that the last nutrient loss reduction strategy indicated that between the state and NGOs, there was a $52 million investment in conservation, in agriculture conservation in the state, which is over 2 years, which is certainly a lot of money. And we don't want to minimize that investment, but it's also not enough. That's less than $1 an acre a year in this state. And that's not enough to really turn the tables. It's also not as nearly as much as what we see in some of our neighboring states where the investments are more in the multiple hundreds of millions. So I just like to highlight that while we're doing a lot in this state, we're definitely not doing enough. And I think that's important to understand.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah.
And Liz, I might add something to Corey's statement there. And I think you hit it nail on the head there, Corey, is that investment in the Midwest. And you look at the I states and you look at the U.S. Census of Agriculture that came out, Illinois lags behind significantly amongst many of our other I states here in the Midwest, and also just Midwest in general when it comes to preserving the agricultural sector, our conservation, our soil and water. And Illinois' #1 industry is agriculture. So why would we not want to protect it and ensure that we have a longevity? Because agriculture is not just in the fields, it stimulates so many other industries across the entire state. And we need to make sure that our elected officials, regardless of their location, understands that what happens in our rural communities and on our fields directly impacts every aspect and every corner of the state.
Perfect summary there. Yeah. And I too, just as we go towards the solutions, which is like the next portion of our program today, just thinking of what you're going to hear is solutions that are mainly focused on appropriations. We're talking about funding. So these are real on the table solutions happening right now in our session here in Springfield. And some of them are focused directly on supporting farmers. And one of the big pieces of this too, of this whole pie of conservation funding, is that farmers they're risk averse. They don't exactly want to jump into something new, like maybe planting cover crops if maybe there isn't that buffer of conservation funding to support them. They're already in a very risky business, with that being farming. So having what we need in a conservation funding pool to support farmers at the state and the federal level is really critical for Illinois to reach the goals. We have to show farmers that we're here to support them, and that we have this whole toolbox ready for them to take advantage of, because what they're doing to their land, to their soil, is ultimately then benefiting the environment around them, which includes human health, environmental health, water quality health, etc. So we're going to kind of walk through 3 solutions together, and we'll have our experts on the panel take us through a couple things. And I think it's just a really natural transition to first, as we just last talked about soil water conservation districts, to transition to Corey to share a little bit about stabilizing funding for soil water conservation districts. And then we'll talk a little bit about increased funding for a program called the Fall Covers for String Savings Program with Dylan. And then we'll cap it off with, how do we get this dedicated long-term conservation funding? Elliot's going to give us a little bit of recap of what happened last year and what we need to do this year. And we can take questions in the chat, and there'll likely be some time after everybody presents to do a couple minutes of questions too. So save those, feel free to type them out, or hopefully we can tackle this verbally too and have it be a little discussion based. So I'm going to pass it over to Corey.
Yeah, thanks. So HB, so I think we all just heard about soil and water conservation districts, and I won't dive in them too much farther, except to say that they are the boots on the ground providing technical assistance for our farmers, and they're definitely a keystone for Illinois conservation. And so that's why they're important to the conservation conversation, and ensuring funding for these districts is an essential part of that question. HB 5225 was introduced by Ann Williams this year, and what the bill does is basically it seeks to stabilize soil and water conservation district funding. So traditionally, funding the districts has gone through the DOA through an appropriations process that's kind of cumbersome, and it results in more or less a appropriations negotiation or fight every year. By redirecting it, we're looking at a way to stabilize that funding. So some important points about this bill is it does interact with the Tax Act, but it does not increase taxes. It does not change taxes. It's not creating a new tax. All it is a mechanism in the background where money from taxes come in annually and immediately go into the Partners for Conservation Fund, which is where the soil and water conservation districts get their funding out of. This is not an uncommon process. Missouri soil and water conservation districts are funded via, I guess, what I would call a similar mechanism. Why is this needed? First, we saw soil and water conservation districts funding get chopped already in the governor's address. It was cut by $4 million, nearly 50% this year. We see that soil water conservation districts have struggled with funding traditionally. In fact, in 2017, there was no funding for the districts at all, which is part of their challenges. And as we've already talked about a little bit from Michael, these districts are absolutely essential to our conservation. So that's why we're working on this year HB 5225, which is an effort to stabilize that funding.
Thanks, Corey. And maybe what do you see as some of the challenges of passing something like this? I think anytime anybody hears the word tax, they get scared. So what do you see as some obstacles and opportunities for us?
Yeah, so since it does have this use tax associated with the name of the bill, there is this question of, is it a tax? Are we creating a new tax? And I think it's absolutely essential that we express that we're not creating a new tax. We're just redirecting funds in a more efficient manner. And the other thing that gets, kind of questioned is, are we increasing funding? And I think that's important to understand that how this bill is currently written, it would basically stabilize funding at the levels that we saw in Partners for Conservation Fund last year. So it's not a funding increase necessarily. It's not an increased tax. It's just a mechanism in the background to help stabilize this funding and avoid annual fights over funding for the districts.
Thanks for that overview. Any other thoughts or questions on this bill and how we hope to see it work towards stabilizing funding for soil and water conservation districts? Nicole?
Yeah, I saw there was a question, what is meant by technical assistance?
Yeah,
that's my question.
So technical assistance is around understanding how to adopt specific conservation practices in the field. So for example, farmers don't just know how to do cover crops. They don't know what cover crops to plant, what seeding rate to plant them at, when to plant them, which cover crop species to select. Soil water conservation district experts can help with that. They also can help with things like no-till and other conservation practices. Michael, you might be able to speak to that a little bit more in depth.
Absolutely, Corey, you nailed it on the head there. And there's also edge of field practices, so waterways and stream bank stabilization and so forth, other types of practices that may be available through NRCS or the state's cost share program through the Partners for Conservation. So they can basically provide that technical support and then the engineering or access to the engineering or provide it for them to ensure that they're putting it in according to codes and regulations that are outlining the way that those funds are to be invested.
Yeah, an important thing to understand about a lot of these conservation practices that we're asking farmers to adopt is that they don't just happen naturally. In a lot of cases, they can actually cause negative agronomic impacts, at least in the short term. And so having that technical assistance there to help farmers navigate those hurdles, those initial challenges, is really essential to success of conservation adoption.
Thanks, Corey. Great question, Nicole. And Michael, I tagged you in another question. Someone's curious about maybe a resource that the association might have, if you could check that out. And Aaron says, I'd imagine another challenge is that then this funding is not in play for other things, which is the point, but legislators might be hard pressed to lock it down for soil water conservation districts in a stabilized way. Yeah, Aaron,
Um,
this,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Liz.
oh, you're fine. Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting challenge. And, this has been something that not this particular bill, but this has just been something that we have to keep going back to the legislature I think it's a huge key of like explaining what a soil water conservation district is, because many just aren't aware of what these districts do for Illinois, and then getting into the funding conversation.
I mean, I know
Lauren,
my
what do you-
comment's kind of a non-comment, just to say though that I know in Minnesota and I think in Wisconsin, it continues to be seen as like, oh, we have this other money. We could keep giving it to the soil water conservation districts, even those that know and appreciate and value them, but they like that the legislators like to have this chunk, right? But yeah, I think this that there's a model in Missouri, and I know other states have been trying to do so. So I say rah rah. Just it's always tricky to earmark in a general sense funding from a legislator's point of view. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So this bill is definitely going to be an uphill battle to get passed, because we are in some ways you could see it as taking authority out of the legislature. But in reality, we're not. If the legislator wanted to change something, they can change stuff no matter what. So we're not really doing anything. It's or we are doing something, but it's not really taking that authority away. It's just more or less bypassing them. But it is definitely a challenge. We've seen a lot of interest in this bill, though. I think that's important to remember also that it's something like 2/3 of state legislators can see the Sears Tower from their, in the mornings from their from their home offices. And so that really is, I just say that to indicate that they don't have a background in agriculture and they don't know what the districts are. And so a lot of times when we explain those things, it's really important to understand. And I'll just jump on. There's another question. Can you comment on tile? Oh, I see Liz already responded there. So yeah, I mean, tile drainage is an essential tool to help us maintain production in the state. It's a way for us to handle excess water from agriculture fields. And it's probably one of the biggest investments farmers can make in terms of maintaining production.
I think if we could, let's just due to time, I do want to transition over to Dylan, and then we can try to answer these next two in the chat. And if we have time at the end for more questions, let's definitely do that. Nicole, if you don't mind writing it out for now, but hopefully we can get back to answering it verbally. So
Okay,
I want to
thanks.
pass it over to Dylan. And just let me know when to switch for you, Dylan.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I'm happy to speak to fall covers for spring savings. As we just heard from Michael and Corey, soil and water conservation districts are they're the boots on the ground providing technical assistance to support these practices and support producers in adopting these practices. But there's also a strong need for a little bit of practice support to mitigate some of the potential negative agronomic impacts of changing things on your farm. As Liz mentioned, it's a risky business already, and when you make big changes, you want to make sure that you're not going to be put out the next year. And cover crops are one of those big changes that we need to see in Illinois to support our soil health and our waterways. We talk about it often at AFT, soil is kind of like a kidney for our waterways. When it's healthy, it can retain more moisture, it can retain those excess nutrients and really help us drive towards the nutrient loss reduction goals. And this is where the fall covers for spring savings program kind of kicks in at the tail end of that, funding for SWCDs and the need for practice support. I don't think it's a new program for most of the folks here. A lot of you have all been integral in making it happen over the last 5 years. But quickly, it's a state-led initiative that provides a $5 discount per acre for farmers on crop insurance per acre for farmers who plant cover crops in the fall between their cash crops. And it also, speaking to SWCDs, supports our districts by providing $1 an acre for verification, for them to go out and do spot checks and make sure that these cover crops are planted and are growing. This first slide here shows the program growth since 2019 when it was first established. We had about 50,000 acres in the first year and second year. And this past, 2023, we had 160,000 acres. What's happened in that time that these few maps don't show is the demand for the program has absolutely outstripped the funding and the capacity we have at the state. And the very first year, it took 12 days to fill those 50,000 acres. This past year, to fill 140,000 acres, it took 2 hours. It's just wildly popular all across the board. And that's why we're looking for a little extra funding this year. Go to the next one, Liz. In AFT, we like the environmental outcomes that come along with these cover crops. We use a Peacock calculator to estimate the nitrogen and sediment and phosphorus reductions. And what we've seen is that there's been a little over 1 million pounds of nitrogen kept out of waterways in Illinois and sent down to the Mississippi because of this program since inception. Also 380,000 pounds of sediment kept out of our waterways, which helps improve navigation and also keeps phosphorus right where it's at. Go into the next one quick, Liz. And so this speaks to kind of where that demand is. I'm going to throw one other term at you, the Pandemic Cover Crop Program. This was a federal initiative that went on during the pandemic, just years 21 and 22. And it showed that we had, in just 3 months, about 540,000 acres sign up for this exact same program, just funded by the feds. The next year, we had 466,000 acres sign up. So we know that there's a lot of acres out there, and we know that the planters are ready to put these acres into play. And we'd love to see that happen and get to those outcomes down there at the bottom. If we can reduce nitrogen in our waterways by 1.4 million pounds a year, I think that we could all see that as a success, especially if we can support our farmers in adopting these conservation practices. Do that last one, Liz. And this is where increased funding for the FCSS comes into play. SB 3814 and the House version 5757 provides a simple line item appropriation to support that 500,000 acre number. Really excited about this one. It's a straightforward ask that is based on data that we have and wide support in both agriculture and conservation communities. That's a quick on fall covers.
Thanks, Dylan. Any questions on this funding ask, fall covers for spring savings, or any more context? Michael?
I was going to say, Liz, if you don't mind, I was just going to add a couple other context. I really appreciate Dylan and AFT's push for this initiative. And let's just look at the nutrient loss reduction strategy outcomes. We found that in the last biennial report that we had 1.37 million acres, roughly 4% of Illinois' ag land in cover crops. And if we even take the lowest possible number of the 23 million acres of row crops, if we could try to get to even 40% of that acreage being cover cropped, we're looking at adding 10.8 million acres. And so I think when we start looking at the large context of where we need to get to, and if you look at the nutrient loss reduction strategies, chapter 8, where they talk about the scenarios, one of the easiest areas that we can start looking at curbing some of our nutrient flows and nutrient loss is simply to add cover crops. And then, of course, if you combined it with tillage practice, you just significantly elevate the ability to protect our soil, the soil health, the reduction of loss of nutrients, and it's a major impact on the overall production of our agricultural lands. And so, asking for an additional 500,000 acres is a really a significant effort forward and continues to put forward the motion. We also know that more and more producers are wanting to capture or get connected with cover crops, and having a 5% discount on their cover crop insurance is a value. It may be what introduces folks into getting into cover crops, reduces a little bit of their risk. And then the final thing is, and you start thinking about it, we know that the majority of our innovators, so to speak, on that diffusion of innovation scale are probably been tapped already. What we need to be looking at is if we're going to have real impact on our conservation and our nutrient losses here in the state of Illinois, is we've got to get more of our middle adopters engaged in these practices. And these sorts of programs can open the door so that we can look at long-term impact. And once this tool is there, the conservation front lines, boots on the ground staff can use these tools to open up the door for further conversations to talk about other practices that may be beneficial as well.
Thanks for that additional context, Michael. Not seeing any other questions in the chat here. Really great overview, Dylan. It's just awesome to see this program was kind of like grassroots working with another state, Iowa, on how they did their program, then a bunch of organizations and farmers here in Illinois working on making it happen. And to see the growth has been pretty incredible. So like you said, this is a planter ready number, and I really hope that we can see the increase in funding so we can see more cover crops throughout Illinois. I just love driving down the highway when it's cold and seeing green growing instead of bare ground. So I'm really hoping that this one works out this year. So I will pass it over to Elliot now, maybe to share a little bit about what happened last year with a initiative that we all worked on, and just something a missing piece that we're going to be working on this year.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And a big thanks to a lot of you, because I know a lot of you helped with this last year, either putting in witness slips or being in the Capitol and stuff. So I definitely appreciate that. But last year we passed Senate Bill 1701. This is the state's first kind of endeavor of setting up a soil health program to start working with the Department of Ag and Soil and Water Conservation districts to really look at and try to educate around soil health practices in a more kind of concerted way that's been done in the past. We were very happy to finally get that bill done through the legislature. It passed and was signed by the governor. But unfortunately, due to what amounts to sort of a clerical error, there was a part of the budget for that bill that was not funded in the state budget last year. It was $250,000 that was going to go towards hiring at the Department of Agriculture to get the right people on board to help implement it. Luckily for us, the governor's office put out their proposed budget a couple of weeks ago, and that $250,000 that was missing last year has been proposed by the governor himself, which is great. That sets it up to basically send a signal to the legislative leaders that this is a priority to get done, which is fantastic. But even with all that, the proposed budget is what it is. It's a proposal. So what we want to do is make an extra push in the Capitol with all of you and our partners to make sure that we send a clear message to the budgeteers in the Capitol that that money needs to be there. We're to a point that, we need to get this program off the ground. And while it's a little bit maybe later than we had originally hoped, if we can get this money in by like May, the Department of Ag should be able to start making moves on doing the hiring that they need to get this thing implemented. It's going to dovetail very much with a number of other conservation programs we have. But it's a very important opportunity that we have to get this thing going. So definitely kind of a technical addition to like the things that we're advocating for, but very important nonetheless.
Yeah, like I said, it's just that missing chunk that we really need to make this whole. Any questions for Elliot? And this, especially if you're coming to Soil Health Lobby Day, this one isn't exactly on the priority list because, like Elliot did mention, it's a little technical. And I think, we're just focusing on some of these priorities plus a few additional. So don't worry about the messaging per se for this particular bill if you are coming to the Lobby Day on March 6th, but still super important towards the conversation we're having today about why conservation funding is just so critical to help us reach the goals of the nutrient loss reduction strategy. That bill in itself that Elliot mentioned is like its main goal is working on the strategy and providing some resources and solutions, but we need the staff there in place to make that happen. Okay. There was a question a little earlier that I'd love to dig into, and Michael, if you're available, maybe we can pass it to you. It is very SWCD focused. How much do you think the lack of SWCD funding / capacity in the past has affected farmers seeking info and assistance from TSPs?
That's a great question and a lot there to unpack, I will say. It's one of those situations where because funding has been so up and down, it's often hard to sustain many of the staff that we need out in the fields, because then they'll jump to other opportunities. And so if we can get some more dedicated funding, some more true commitments, then I think that it's easier for many of those frontline professionals to feel confident in making a career in these opportunities. I can tell you that the folks that I've worked with in the soil and water conservation districts, I've never found a more dedicated group of people really passionate about making a difference in their local community. And they've often done at the sacrifice of their family, because they could be making a lot more, in a higher income in other careers, but they're so committed and passionate about making a difference in their local community with soil and water conservation, working with the agriculture industry, engaging their general public. And so I think if we could align the funding structures with the needs, I think then in the long run we will continue to see an increase. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the most telling conversations I had from that was an individual from another state said that they were looking at having their campaign slogan being the best kept secret. And I was concerned about that. And I told them that I thought that was possibly one of the worst possible campaign messages, because we should not be a kept secret. And that's really what's happened in the past. A lot of the SWCDs have just been rolling up their sleeves, doing their job, and the secret has been kept. And we need to help elevate that. And I know that's one of the things at the association, we are committed to ensuring that we have stronger branding and messaging, and working with partners that are here today. We couldn't ask for a better support of engaged partners helping us to address this, because if we had to do this alone, it would be a much harder battle for us to navigate. But to have all the folks that have been here to talk and share insights, I think in the long run, we're setting ourselves up for a better success going forward. And the short answer to that is, the more secured investment we can get, I think that we will be able to ensure that we provide that frontline technical support needed to advance conservation practices.
Thank you, Michael. Well, with the 2 minutes we have, if you have any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But I also I want to thank our partners here, Elliot, Michael, Dylan. I think Corey already had to leave for another meeting, but thanks for spending a little time with us to talk through some of the solutions, how we can try to get a little bit more conservation funding here in Illinois to reach those goals of the NLRS. And I want to note that, many of you already know and are probably already signed up, but we have a really great lineup this week of soil health events. So if you are curious what else is on the agenda, please take a look at our website, which lists all of the events. There's over 20 to look at. And if you have signed up for Soil Health Lobby Day on Wednesday, we're really looking forward to seeing you here in Springfield. I think, thank you for sharing that resource, Joan. There is one thought here from Joan Cox about a recent Farm Doc article about federal farm policy. And we rank 3rd in the nation for Farm Bill programs. And that is a really great statistic, Joan. I think as maybe Corey and Michael were pointing out, we're a huge ag state and we're getting less funding than some of our neighbors like in Kentucky for conservation program funding. So it is, I definitely look forward to digging into that a little bit, because it is kind of a stark statistic of what the reality is and the funding that we actually have to play around with here in Illinois. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So we, I think, are ending on time. Thanks again to you all for spending an hour with us. And I don't want to hold you up if you do have to scoot right to the next meeting. I know it's kind of a jam-packed day for Soil Health Week events. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you so much, Liz, for pulling us together.
Yeah. All
See
right. Have
y'all.
a great day.